if you have them, to Philippians 4, 1 through 9. And with kind of Thanksgiving coming up, I kind of like this because it's something about rejoicing in the Lord. And our early forefathers and foremothers definitely did that. They suffered a great, terrible price to give us what we have today. And so they always were rejoicing in the Lord. And that's something that we need to do, again, on a daily basis. And this was written by Paul to the church in Europe. And so our fellow brothers and sisters in Europe, same racial kindred people of Israel. I'm asked Freeland to come up here and read the scripture. And again, it's Philippians 4, 1 through 9.
Therefore, my beloved and longed for brethren, my joy and crown, so stand fast in the Lord, beloved. I implore Euodia and I implore Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. And I urge you also, true companion, to help these women who labored with me in the gospel, with Clement also and the rest of my fellow workers, whose names are written in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Jesus Christ. Finally, brethren, whatever things are true, whatever things are noble, whatever things are just, whatever things are pure, whatever things are lovely, whatever things are of good report, if there is any virtue, and if there is anything praiseworthy, meditate on these things. The things which you have learned and received and heard and saw in me, these do, and the God of peace will be with you.
Thank you, Freeland. And with that, if everyone please be seated, and if I can have Pastor Rob please come up.
Okay, this coming Thursday is what? Thanksgiving Day, right? And this time of year, I'm supposed to, as a pastor here, I'm supposed to remind you to thank God for the blessing He has given us. And so that's what we're going to do today. But before we do that, I've got a video I'm going to play, and I want you to listen to it. Very short. And if I did it right, it should start up right away, as soon as I click this button. Okay. First problem. All right. That's not it. I know what happened. I got the wrong clicker. There we go.
Christopher Columbus symbolizes the initial invasion of European capitalism into the Western Hemisphere. Columbus initiated a centuries-old wave of terrorism, murder, genocide, rape, slavery, ecological degradation, and capitalist exploitation of labor in the Americas. That Columbian wave of destruction continues on the backs of indigenous, African American, and brown people. Racist monuments to slave owners and murderers have always bothered me. Baltimore's poverty is concentrated in African American households, and these statues are just an extra slap in the face. They were built in the 20th century in response to a movement for African Americans' dignity. What kind of a culture goes to such lengths to build such hate-filled monuments? What kind of a culture clings to these monuments in 2017? The culture of white supremacy preceded the United States. It's at the foundation of U.S. culture, business, bureaucracies, and psychology. Observe how vehemently Republican and Democratic misleaders defend genocidal terrorists like Christopher Columbus and George Washington. White supremacy and the systems saying it must be replaced, or people will continue to suffer and the planet will continue to die. Part of our evolution as humans requires tearing down monuments to destructive forces and tearing down systems that maintain them. Part of our evolution is to develop new and ancient systems of democratic economics that center the needs of poor, indigenous, African American, and brown people.
Now, I don't know about you, but I found that quite disturbing. Not just the fact they're taking down the statue of Columbus. They did the same thing last week in Los Angeles. They removed, officially, that was done by a person who did it on his own. But the city of Los Angeles took down the monument of Columbus last week. And of course, we know the attempt to take down other various monuments around the country, Confederate monuments, but they don't stop there. They're the same city that took down Robert E. Lee's monument that made the big publicity in 2017 at the Charlottesville. There's a Lewis and Clark monument they're wanting to remove from that also. And other monuments around the country, Stephen Foster, who's just a songwriter, Joan of Arc. I mean, she wasn't even American. She was a 14th century peasant girl in France, and they want to remove her monument. Anything that reminds people of our culture, our heritage, our heroes, needs to come down in their minds. Now, Sir Walter Scott, in 1805, Sir Walter Scott wrote those words of a poem. He said, "Breathes there the man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, 'This is my own, my native land.'" And then the rest of the poem talks about those men who may be willing to sell out their love of country and their native land for wealth or fame or money and so on. And then he concludes the poem by addressing those people willing to give up on their native land just for wealth. And he ends his poem by saying, "And doubling dying shall go down to the vile dust from where once he sprung, unwept, unhonored, and unsung." Thanksgiving Day is recognized as both a Christian and as a cultural holiday, a celebration, if you will. But it wasn't until the presidency of Abraham Lincoln that it became a national holiday. I recall as a youngster growing up in Detroit, Michigan, that much of our school activities around Thanksgiving time was reading stories of the Pilgrims and reading about the Mayflower and the ship and the rest of the Pilgrims went through coming here, the signing of the Mayflower Compact. And in school, we would cut out turkeys and we'd cut out images of the Mayflower and we'll put them on the wall and we'll cut out images of the Pilgrims, and all our Pilgrims wore white and black. I don't know how it was when you went to school, but all our Pilgrims were dressed in white and black. Now, I don't know if they really dressed that way or not, but in school, that's what we did. We had a picture. They're dressed in white and black. And then at the back of the wall of our school that I went to, we had a cutout of a large cornucopia was up on the wall also. And from our home and from our school and from our community, we were taught to love and embrace the Christian traditions and holidays. And I know some people argue over whether some of these holidays are Christian or pagan. That's besides the point. I'm just telling how it was in my school. We're taught, embraced, and honor Christ at Christmas time and Easter time and Thanksgiving time is what we did. And no one was worried about offending Indians or offending Mexicans. We weren't worried about offending Negroes, or certainly weren't worried about offending homosexuals. We didn't know what that was when I was a child growing up. And transgendered people, nobody was worried about offending transgendered people. I mean, what is that anyway? We're not even sure even today. Because America was white and America was Christian. And no one imagined it to be anything other than that. Nobody imagined America. When I was growing up, and some of you people here that are my age about, You remember those days. And there was never any thought that America was anything other than a white Christian country. If you would go to tell somebody and say, did you know America is a white Christian country? They'll look at you and say, duh, like, oh, yeah, of course. They would have thought you a little bit crazy, even thinking it's something to point out. We're a united country. And Thanksgiving was a holiday that not only do we honor it as something Thanksgiving, but it kind of connected us, in my mind anyway. People have different experiences, I know that. But in my mind, it was a holiday that kind of connected us to the soil of America, kind of connected to our native land. It was our holiday. Not only was it a holiday we honored, but it was a holiday that taught us and helped us to understand that we were under the protective care of Providence. There's something special about this country. We are a united country. And I know about the war for Southern independence. I'm aware of that. But in spite of that, we were one people. We shared the same ancestry. We shared the same values. We shared the same language. We shared the same history. And we shared the same faith. We were united. America, up until 1970, America was 92% white. Now we hear diversity is our strength. We hear that all the time. And I heard a conservative, forget his name, on TV the other day, talking about America's roots are in this, that we're opening to all people of any religion or any race. Everybody, the history of America, he said, our identity was we're open to all these people. And I'm thinking, what? Where did you get that from? And of course, I know where they get it from. That's what's being taught in schools. So we're told diversity is our strength. John Jay, who was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers, some of you people may not be aware of who he was, but he was one of the writers of the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were a series of, I think, 85 essays that are basically propaganda sheets, if I'll call it that were written and printed and distributed for the people to read to help build support for the signing of the Constitution. And John Jay, addressing this issue of diversity, really did. Over 200 years ago, John Jay addresses the issue of diversity. We're told today diversity is our strength, but that's not what John Jay said in his Federalist Papers. He says, and every conservative and every historian and every person who strives to a political office and so forth is probably aware of the Federalist Papers, and many of them give them a lot of due recognition. But John Jay said, and I believe, wasn't he a Supreme Court? First Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He said, I often have taken notice that Providence has been pleased to give this one connected country to one united people. A people descended from the same ancestors, speaking the same language, professing the same religion, attached to the same principles of government. Actually, I have it on the screen. There we go. Principles of government, and very similar to their manners and customs. He basically said the strength of America was what? Same people, same ancestors, same religion, same faith and language. He was not in any way even suggesting that diversity would have been a good thing. In fact, he pointed out that this unity is what gave us our strength. There's a poem, or not a poem, a short story written years ago. In the story is called Man Without a Country. Some of you may have read it, A Man Without a Country. The setting of the story takes place in 1807, and the protagonist of the story is Philip Nolan. He's a U.S. naval officer. He's on trial. He becomes angry with the court, and he blurts out to the judge. He says, I wish never again to hear the words of United States of America. And the judge grants him his wish in his conviction. And the sentence is he will spend the rest of his life on a naval ship, never allowed to set foot back on U.S. soil again. He'll be transferred from one ship to another ship. No one on the ship is ever to speak to him about America or utter the word America. No one is to say the word United States. No one is to give him any update of what's happening in America. It was to become a blank slate in his mind. And at first he's defiant in the story. At first he's defiant. Then he begins to miss America. And he begins, and later on in his life, he actually builds a shrine to America. Because now he had learned to deeply love the country he once despised. At one point in his life, there was a young sailor, and Philip Norton approaches him and says, "Remember, boy, that behind all these men, behind officers and government, and people even, there was a country herself, your country, and that you belong to her, as you belong to your own mother. Stand by her, boy. It was stand by your mother." See, sometimes people confuse country with government. And when we talk about love of country, we're not talking about love of the government that had now usurped its authority in this nation. We're talking about the country, the roots of our people, the very roots of our nation, our heritage. This flag was created long before the country, as we know it, came about. This flag came about before our Declaration of Independence was even signed. The flag doesn't represent a federal government in Washington, D.C. America is a gift to regathered Israel. It's our gift. 2 Samuel 7:10 points out to the sons of Abraham that he's going to appoint them a new nation, a new land, a new place for his people Israel. When we think of Thanksgiving and we think of the Pilgrims and we think of Plymouth Colony, we need to understand the promise that God gave, the covenant he honored in our nation. You know, when I was a child, the love of country was taught as clearly as the love of fresh air and the love of sunshine. In the school I attended, we were taught to attach ourselves to America. There's no question that America was a white Christian country. We sang church songs in music class. A painting of George Washington was prominently displayed in the front of each school classroom. The principal's office, just down the hall from the school I attended, right outside the principal's office was a large picture of George Armstrong Custer, the Indian fighter. You would not find that in school today. No one would have imagined a time when America would not be considered a white Christian country. We could not even imagine it to be so. It was written deep into our DNA. And then entered the disconnected generation. I call the current generation that we see arise about us, I call them the disconnected generation. We have the millennials, the X generation, and the baby boomers, of which I'm a part of. But the people today are the disconnected generation. No connection to our history, no connection to our forefathers, no understanding of our forefathers. Names they even forget, or who they were, or what they mean. The generation I'm from is called the baby boomers, but I like to call it the cursed generation. The cursed generation. Because I came from a generation where kids in school were taught to love America. And they went to colleges and the universities. And they began throwing red paint on Vietnam servicemen coming back from war, protesting, ripping down our flag, desecrating the memory of our forefathers. They became cursed. The video we saw a moment ago was a man coming there and he smashing the monument of Columbus. It's just one example of millions of people millions of people who have been infected with this anti-American virus. Those who want to undermine and destabilize America are quite aware of the need to destroy respect for the Founding Fathers. They know they have to do that. For years, Americans cherished and admired men like Washington and Sam Adams and Thomas Jefferson and John Hancock and Patrick Henry. Now they're often demonized. The Republic itself is demonized. Why? Why are they doing that? It's simple. No one will fight to preserve something they do not love. And if they can take away a love of America away from our hearts, the love of our forefathers away from the hearts of our children, they'll never fight to preserve it. Especially if you've been taught that your forefathers are nothing but old, self-centered, racist white men unworthy of veneration. Most of the work to undermine respect for the Founding Fathers came out of the New School for Social Research. It was kind of similar to what we all are or somewhat familiar with, the Institute for Social Research, which was started by came out of Frankfurt, Germany, called the Frankfurt School, the Institute of Social Research. And of course, when the German revival occurred in the early 30s, they all packed up and left and came to the United States and hooked up with the New School of Social Research, which was started by John Dewey, who's supposed to be the father of modern education, and Charles Beard, who is supposed to be a historian of great renown. And they helped start this New School of Social Research. It's still in existence today, has a current enrollment of 11,000 students. Charles Beard wrote a book called The Economic Interpretation of the Constitution, which basically says your forefathers didn't love America, they didn't love the people, they didn't love liberty, and they didn't love any of those things that you've been taught in your school. The Founding Fathers were just fighting for economic interest, economic wealth, and economic gain. That's what Charles Beard says. And this has affected many students today. And of course, with the New School of Social Research, teaming up with the Institute of Social Research, was set up at Columbia University after they left Germany during the revival. From that point on, from the early 1960s, or the mid-1960s anyway, up until the very time we live today, to the present time, the knowledge of our Christian origins and our republic, and regard for our founding fathers have been diminished and taken away. I remember in 1983 attending a patriotic conference in Hayden Lake, Idaho, and there was a fellow there in his early 20s, and he's at this patriotic conference, but in talking to him, he hated the Constitution, he hated our founding fathers, and I thought to myself, where did he get this stuff from? Of course, now I know. The New School of Social Research. Eldridge Cleaver, who was one of the founding members of the Black Panther Party, he wrote in his book, So and Ice, I've got a copy in my library, in 1968 he wrote, this is what he said. What has happened suddenly is that a white race has lost its heroes. Worse, its heroes have been revealed as villains, and its greatest heroes as arch-villains. That's what has happened. You wonder what's happening to America today? You wonder why kids and young people and even people approaching middle age now have this disdain, a growing disdain for America, or don't have any real love for it, or no attempt to embrace it. That's why. As the teachings of the Marxist founders of the New School for Social Research, and I want to point out again, John Dewey was the founder, one of the founders of that school, and John Dewey is considered the man responsible for modern education. He's John Dewey. For many, our founding fathers have gone from admiration to contempt. Professor Dan Brook of University of California in Berkeley said, "We do not have to feel guilty," referring to the Pilgrims and the founding fathers. He said, "We don't have to feel guilty, but we should feel something." In other words, you should feel guilty. I mean, you either feel guilty, you don't feel guilty. He said, "We don't have to feel guilty, but you should feel something." Professor Robert Jensen of the University of Texas says that we should replace Thanksgiving Day with a National Day of Atonement. A National Day of Atonement. Now, the word atonement is a religious word, and basically means, he's telling us, we're an immoral people. We need to atone for our sins, for what our forefathers have done. We're an immoral people. We have to have this day of atonement because you're all immoral people. Instead of honoring Christopher Columbus, we should have Indigenous Peoples Day. America's an immoral country. Each year, there are many cities in this country, or in America today, United States, many cities and states that actually have stopped celebrating Columbus Day as an official holiday of the city, and several states have done the same thing. And there's no such thing as a Columbus Day. It's Indigenous Peoples Day. In fact, there's 130 cities and states in America that no longer officially celebrate Columbus Day. They now celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. On one blog that I looked at, this is what the person said about Thanksgiving. It's a day we commemorate taking advantage of the Indians by stealing their land, food, and lifestyle in exchange for cheap trinkets. That's what he says. This other person says the last Thursday in November, about Thanksgiving, he said the last Thursday in November when white Americans celebrate the beginning of the rape and genocide of Native Americans by stuffing their fat belly as if they ever needed a reason to eat. That's the attitude they have for you, for our people, and for our children. Now, I really don't care if Indians want to celebrate Indigenous Peoples Day. I don't really care what they do. It doesn't matter to me. But keep your hands off of our ancestors. Keep your hands off of our heroes. Our ancestors, our heroes, are worth recognizing and worthy of admiration. Indians never built a ship worthy of an ocean voyage. So, of course, they never went to Europe and conquered Europe. They couldn't do it anyway. They didn't have the ability to create a ship that could travel the oceans. Our people were coming to America 500 years before Columbus. You all know that. The Vikings were settling Newfoundland and so on. They were coming here. And why were our people doing this? Why were white people going to all these far outstretched lands and continents? Why were they doing that? It's very simple. It was a fulfillment of prophecy. It says in Genesis 28:14, referring to our people, our people, the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He says, and the seed shall be in the dust of the earth, and thou shalt spread abroad to the west, and to the east, and to the north, and to the south. Your people are going to do that. You're going to spread it around. You're going to colonize. He told Joshua that wherever you place your foot, you're going to conquer. And we've conquered. So the pilgrims came to this land. It wasn't just some people. There was a church. The pilgrims were members of a church, a separatist church. And the church, as a body, came to America from Plymouth, England, and settled in Massachusetts. They had a charter from the king to set up a colony in northern Virginia, but a gale, perhaps the leftover remnants of a hurricane, blew their ship northward, and they ended up coming to Cape Cod Bay. The Mayflower was about 90 feet long, and it was 25 feet wide. It carried 102 passengers. Would you get on a ship only 90 feet long and sail across the ocean? I mean, that's how much longer than this church. I've been on it. My mom and dad took us on a couple cruises before they passed away. We haven't been on one since, but before they passed away, they took us on a couple cruises on those big ocean liners, and you can still feel the rocky waves of the ocean on those ocean liners. Can you imagine a little ship, 90 feet long? After 65 days at sea, the pilgrims arrived in North America in the middle of November, 1620. Snow was covering the ground, the land was frozen, temperatures were well below freezing. Mayflower first approached the east side of Cape Cod, and that's where the Mayflower Compact was written, they say. Scouting parties were put out to find a suitable site for a colony. On December 6th, 10 men faced the frigid winter weather and took a small boat called a shallop, and they went along the coast of Cape Cod. They found an Indian burial ground and a unoccupied casino. And, well, maybe, I guess I read that wrong. Unoccupied dwellings, okay. And then they camped for the night, and then the next day, with December 9, and they got up and they began to realize they're under attack because Indians were attacking them. I thought, the first warfare between the white people and Indians was them attacking white people. They attacked them. There was exchange of gunfire and some arrows, but nobody was hurt. Then they proceeded on the Shelpa and they got caught in a storm, and they had some trouble with the ship, and they docked at a little island which is today called Clark's Island. On Monday, the 11th of December, they went ashore where they found a large open field and plenty of fresh running water. And they returned back and said that we found a place for our community. So the Mayflower returned to that location from the east side of Cape Cod Bay over to the west side of Cape Cod Bay. And they arrived at Plymouth and dropped anchor on December 16, 1620. And construction of the settlement began on the 23rd. And this is where the story of Plymouth Rock occurred. Except for they put out a few hunting parties and scouting parties, but the remainder of the pilgrim lived on the Mayflower until March 21. Sickness ravished the pilgrims. Some people suggest that it was because the cramped quarters inside the Mayflower. If they would have been out, even though it had been cold, they would have been out in the fresh air, they probably would have been better. But the cramped quarters, the stuffy quarters, probably made it susceptible to disease and sickness. About half the pilgrims died that winter. First Thanksgiving lasted 3 days, was attended by 53 pilgrims and 90 Indians. We all know that they established friendly relations with the Indians. We all heard the story about Squanto. He saved the colony. You all heard that, right? Squanto saved the colony. That's a myth. Squanto didn't save the colony. Bradford does say that Squanto did show him how to plant corn, because corn was an American crop. It didn't grow in England, so he did show him how to plant corn. He gave very little recognition very little attention to Squanto in his writings. The colony was starving, and it needed to be saved, but it wasn't Squanto who saved them. I know that you've been told, but Bradford says it was something entirely different. What saved the colony was because they switched from a commune to a free market economy. The colony origin was a commune. Everybody kind of shared what they wanted to have. They shared this, we all kind of worked together, we shared food, but, they were pilgrims, but they were still sinful people, and troubles arose. Some people didn't want to go out and work in the fields. Some claimed they were sick, so they couldn't work in the fields. Some people were complaining because why should I do all the work and somebody else get the benefits from it? And so nobody was working. Even a point where some people were starting to steal food out of the fields before it was time to actually harvest it. Bradford writes, so they began to think how they might raise as much corn as they could to save the colony and obtain a better crop than they had done, that they might not languish in misery. I have that on the screen. Make it ahead. At length, after much debate of things, and so assigned to every family a parcel of land according to the proper proportion of their number. This had a very good success, for it made all hands industrialists. So as much more corn was planted than would otherwise have been. The women now were willing to go into the fields and took little ones with them to set corn, which before they would allege weakness and inability. Now there was one paragraph, I want to point out there's one paragraph referring to the women, but in other places he refers to men doing the same thing. This paragraph he just mentioned the women, but he said the young men were doing the same thing. And to have, and as a community, if you'd have forced them into the field, he says, they would have thought it'd be like tyranny and oppression. But so the free market economy what saved them. They saved them because people knew that they needed to get out of work and hustle. They wanted to have something to feed their family. The first Thanksgiving occurred, and we all read the story. I find it interesting. I've got this book here. I don't think it's available in public schools anymore. It's called The Story of the Pilgrims. I'm not going to read the whole book to you, but the very last paragraph I'm going to read, well, I will read the last couple paragraphs. There was a military exercise referring to the first Thanksgiving, which Captain Standish had planned for. This is printed about sometime in the 1930s. Had planned for. The Indians were asked to sit down on the ground in a circle. With a blare of trumpets, a roll of drums, and a waving of banners, the little military company proudly marched down the hill. The Indians were at first much interested, but they became quite terrified when, at intervals, Captain Standish gave the orders for the company to fire their muskets. Once, when the time came, the cannon from the top of the hill roared out. Suddenly, it struck terror in their very souls. "Ha, ha," laughed Mary Chilton. "Our captain likes a good joke." The Indians formed a hunting party and brought home 5 deer to the colonists. Now, I don't know if this, well, I'm going to next read, I don't know if it really happened, okay? This person said it did. But the point is, this is what was available in your public schools. The feast lasted 3 days, and when the great chief left, he said, "God loves his white children best." Would you find that in your schools today? Now, some people said, well, the first Thanksgiving really wasn't at Cape Cod or Plymouth. It was in Virginia. I don't know if you heard that or not. Some people say the first Thanksgiving was in Virginia. It doesn't really matter. Our people celebrated their thanks to God when they're delivered. That's what's important. On September 16, 1619, a ship called the Margaret departed Bristol, England, and bound for the New World. This was 2 years before the Pilgrims. It recorded that after a 2.5-month voyage across the Atlantic, the ship of settlers came to Chesapeake Bay in Virginia and up the James River, and on December 4th, disembarked. The Margaret, now, if you didn't want to travel on a ship across the ocean that was 90 feet long, the Margaret was 35 feet long. Now, how long, I was going to get a tape measure here, I forgot to do it. How long would 35 feet be? I think from that wall to about somewhere in here, maybe. Well, you would get on a ship 35 feet long? I don't even want to go on both shows on a ship 35 feet long, I don't think. 35 feet long? That's unbelievable. Had 35 passengers, settlers, and a crew of 5 led by Captain John Woodleaf. Now, here's what's interesting. Here's what the ship carried. It carried 8,000 biscuits, 160 pounds of butter, 127 pounds of bacon. So the passengers had to make room for all this stuff. 60 bushels of peas, 20 bushels of wheat, 6 tons of cider. I suspect that means liquor. 15 gallons of Aquavita. Now I thought, Aquavita? Is that something you get from the health food store? I didn't know he's on Aquavita. But I turned out Aquavita is brandy, or rum or something like that. 15 gallons of Aquavita, 5.5 tons of beer. If they're going to drown, they're going to go without happy, I guess. It also included were the clothes, kitchen utensils, construction agricultural tools, weapons, Bibles, and 6,000 beads to trade with the Indians. They disembarked, the men got off, stood and listened. It said they stood and listened in complete silence on the shores of the James River, 1619. Then at the command of Captain Woodleaf, they knelt on the dried grass and prayed. They said, Captain Woodleaf prayed, "We ordain that this day of our ship's arrival, as a place assigned for plantation in the land of Virginia, shall be yearly and perpetually kept holy as a day of thanksgiving to Almighty God." See, this land is our greatest gift. This land of America. It affords us the ability to have everything else that you have. The liberties our forefathers gave us. Now, I know it's been shattered and been under attack, and I know that all kinds of things are being done to undermine our nation, undermine our people, undermine our freedoms and liberties. I know that. But our forefathers had foresight to create the liberties that allowed our people to create and become the master of the world. This land is our greatest gift. One settler in Jamestown said America was a land chosen by the finger of God. In 1669, Nathaniel Morton, writing the history of Plymouth, said that America was God's holy habitation. About 200 years ago, John O'Sullivan said America was the greatest temple ever built, for the worship of the Almighty. See, America is our land. It was a gift given to us. It wasn't given to the Negroes, it wasn't given to the Mexicans, it wasn't given to the Chinese, it wasn't given to the Jews, it wasn't given to none of the interventions. It was given to you and I, it was given to our people. It's our gift, this land, America. It's a land that we have to cherish. Our native land is what we cherish more than anything else. It was a gift given to Abraham and Sarah as a regathering place of his people, Israel. It is referred to as Joseph's land in Deuteronomy 33. Just read it real quickly, then we're going to close. And of Joseph he said, "Blessed of the Lord be his land, for the precious things of heaven, for the dew and for the deep that couches beneath, and for the precious fruit brought forth by the sun, and for the precious things put forth by the moon, and for the chief things of the ancient mountains, and for the precious things of the lasting hills, and for the precious things of the earth and fullness thereof, and for all the good of him that dwelt in the bush. Let the blessings come upon the head of Joseph, and upon the head of him that was separated from his brethren. His glory like the firstlings of a bullock, and his horns are like the horns of a unicorn, and they shall push the people together to the ends of the earth." Their power, the other translation says, their power of this Joseph's land will become so powerful, they will actually be able to push the people, the intermentions, to the end of the earth. And they are the 10,000 of Ephraim, they are thousands of Manasseh. Joseph's land, God's holy habitation, the land appointed by the finger of God. America, the greatest temple ever built for the worship of the Almighty. Now I'm going to close with one more video. Very short, about how you should have love for the land.
You mean to tell me it is terrible that man doesn't even need you? My man's the only thing we're fighting for. We're fighting for. We're fighting for. Because it's the only thing that lasts. You talk how I am Irish. And don't you be forgetting to see that you're half Irish too. And to anyone with a drop of Irish blood, the man gave you on his like oh dear, you're just a child. It'll come to you. This little man. There's no getting away from it if you're Irish.
The love of the land, our native land.
Everyone, please bow your head for the prayer. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you again for this day. Thank you for this sermon. Thank you that we can be reminded of our great gift that you have given us with this precious land of America. We pray that on a daily basis and leading up to Thanksgiving, we can really meditate and ponder about this beloved land that you have given us, and that we can continue to give that precious land and the images of America to our children, that we can inspire them to know that they have a great land that they can fight for. And by fighting for their land, they can honor their ancestors. Again, we're just thank you for this message. We ask all this in your holy and precious name. Amen. And those listening to us on the internet, if this is the first time tuning in, you can write to us at Christian Revival Center, P.O. Box 602, Harrison, Arkansas 72601. That's Christian Revival Center, P.O. Box 602, Harrison, Arkansas 72601. Or you can email us at revival@southshore.com. Revival@southshore.com. And with that, if I can have Jonathan come up, and we're going to end with one more song, and if everyone can please stand.